Intersections is really to have a place to have civil dialogue on important issues that impact all of us. And so we talk about the environment one month, then we talk about anti-Semitism the next month. So it's a broad range of subject matter. So, but we're very glad to have each of you here. If this is your first time, a special welcome to you. And if you have not filled out the information card at the table to give us your information and would like to do so, we would love to have that, and you'll get a mailing, an email to let you know what is happening, what is coming up, not only at Intersections, but also the broader work of Interfaith Alliance of Iowa. It has been a difficult week. For many of us for different reasons, but ironically, we had debate last night in part of my job is to lobby, and we had debate last night on a bill that was about anti-Semitism and became a much broader conversation, and I would thank Representative Art Stade for his work at the legislature and for his comments last night. They were very, very good. I would just say that you are well represented in the Cedar Rapids area, not only by Representative Stade, but by many of your legislators. So I was there until 9 o'clock last night, as was the representative, and it was an interesting debate, I would say. So. You can watch that online somewhere, I'm sure. But anyway, but I'm delighted to have you here, and I am delighted to have our speaker as well. And we are talking about anti-Semitism and the gifts of Judaism. And we have Rabbi Esther Hugenholtz, who is with the Agudas Achim congregation in the Iowa City area, and she's been there for 2.5 years. We'll get that to come back on, I promise. She was born in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. She obtained her Master's of Science in Cultural Anthropology and Sociology of Non-Western Societies from the University of Amsterdam. Furthering her Jewish education, she studied in Jerusalem, Israel, and was a fellow at the European Institute of Jewish Studies in Stockholm, Sweden. Esther completed the first 2 years of her rabbinical training at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, a seminary affiliated with the conservative movement of Judaism, and interned as a rabbinic fellow at the American Jewish University. She completed the remaining 3 years of her rabbinical training at Leo Bach College in London, UK, so you are like all over the world. And was ordained a rabbi with the seminary in 2013. In her free time, Esther enjoys composing liturgical music, songwriting, writing, traveling, photography, and cooking. She takes an interest in issues of multiculturalism and social justice, and firmly believes in representing a socially relevant and spiritually compelling Judaism for today's world. Will you please welcome Rabbi Hugenholtz, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Connie, thank you very much for introducing me. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me. Can everyone hear me? It's a slight tautology asking that, but it's like, are you awake? Well, I am now. So, like, visually, there we go. Visually, this is the most boring PowerPoints known to man, but I will try to make up for it by not being boring. So thank you very much. Connie already introduced me, and I love being an Iowan by choice. As Connie said, I came 2.5 years ago, and it was the best decision my family made. We love being in the corridor and love being part of this community, and it's really nice to kind of break outside of my Iowa City bubble a little bit and see what's beyond the highway. Up here. So when Connie initially approached me and said, Rabbi, will you do a talk on anti-Semitism, I'll be truthful. My first reaction was, oh God, not again. I've been doing so many of these. And the reason why I say that is not because I don't like giving talks. I mean, I'm a rabbi, I get paid for talking. I'm a paid professional schmoozer. But because when minority traditions or cultures or religions or populations get asked to talk about their experience of oppression, it distracts from the beauty of what we can actually give as a community. And that always makes me very sad. It makes me very sad that I get invited to talk about anti-Semitism instead of the beauty of Judaism. So I had a little chutzpah, which is a Jewish word for audacity or cheekiness. And I pushed back a little and I said, I'd be happy to talk to your people, but I also want to leave some positive things about Judaism with the audience and not just talk about how everyone hates us, right? So that is why we called it an anti-Semitism and the gifts of Judaism. So the approach is, well, it's outlined here. I already did the introduction, so we can skip that. And I wanted to bring you 3 very brief case studies of contemporary anti-Semitism in Europe, and then contrast them with the situation in America, and then offer some textual, spiritual reflections, and then talk about all the good stuff that is in Judaism. So that is our game plan for today, and then of course I look forward to interacting with all of you and your questions and comments. There is no question too strange, so please ask everything. In rabbinic literature we say, one who is shy does not learn, so don't be shy. Alright, so anti-Semitism in Europe today. Obviously, after the Holocaust, Jewish demographics in Europe really plummeted. And we never have made it back to pre-war demographics. And that's really important to understand. In terms of understanding the trauma and the effect of people who want to eliminate us or harm us or curtail us, it's really important that even more than 7 years after the end of the war, we are not back at our 16.6 million Jews worldwide. We're about 14 million now. And I think it's really important to hold in our hearts how big our numbers would have been if 2/3 of our population hadn't been murdered by Hitler. Right? So that is kind of like the alternative demographic line that we can only plot in our minds because all those people who should have been with us are not with us. Obviously, by the end of the Second World War, the European Jewish population had shrunk to 3.8 million. And it's really important to understand that we are just 0.2% of Europe's population. By comparison, Jews in America are 2% of the American population, which is still really tiny, but it's 10 times more, 10 times better representation than that 0.2% that you see listed there. Right? So the experience of being a European Jew is one of quite profound isolation. It's not always a terrible experience. I was quite happy being a European Jew, but there is not the kind of acknowledgement and recognition of your culture and tradition and faith that there is in America. There is no European equivalent of Seinfeld. There is no European equivalent of Jewish representation in pop culture or music or film culture or politics or the arts or literature that you have here. And it was one of the reasons why I wanted to be here, to feel more normal as a Jew. And then I came to Iowa, but Iowans are real nice about it, so as long as they don't serve me pork, it's all good. So the Jewish population in Holland is really tiny. It's under 40,000 people, depending on how you count, on your definition of what a Jew is. We won't really go into that, but it's under 40,000 people. And in the United Kingdom and France, it is significantly larger. those are far bigger populations, but their countries also have far bigger populations than Holland. Holland has 17 million people on a piece of land less than half the size of Iowa. It gets very cramped. And of course the United Kingdom and France have like 60 million, 80 million inhabitants. So, you know, these figures of like around 300,000 to 450,000, 460,000 are of course a drop in the bucket of the total population of those countries. So the United Kingdom has had a really interesting, and by interesting I mean not great, time with anti-Semitism. There is a Yiddish curse that says, may you live in interesting times, and we live in interesting times, so it's absolutely true. But there has been an interesting development over the last few years in the United Kingdom with the charge of anti-Semitism levered against certain leaders of the Labour Party. So the Labour Party is a social democratic party. It's, you know, basically, you know, kind of like, if you would imagine Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders with an actual party, right? The kind of like that kind of like set of politics. So, you know, governments regulating the free market and making sure that people are represented and have their workers' rights represented. So center of left, nothing radical, center of left party, and the leader of that party, Jeremy Corbyn, has been confronted with some pretty serious allegations of anti-Semitism, both him personally as well as his mismanagement of uprooting anti-Semitism in his own party. That doesn't mean to say that there's no anti-Semitism in other British political parties, but you know, it's especially jarring when a political movement proclaims justice and anti-racism and then has anti-Semitism in its highest ranks. So that has been a very difficult issue for the British Jewish community, who are often, like liberal Jews in America, very much politically aligned with those politics, right? So 80% of American Jews vote Democrat, and you know, most Jews in England vote Labour for the same reasons. You know, the Jewish tradition is not necessarily partisan political or, you know, connected to any particular ideology, but the Torah's concern with certain issues of social justice means that many Jews lean to those parties as opposed to other political parties. There are also conservative-minded Jews, and you can also totally justify that through your interpretation of biblical texts. But sociologically, historically, culturally, and religiously, a lot of liberal Jews who are progressive in a religious sense are also politically progressive. So it's been very traumatic for British Jews to feel unmoored from their political home. So this wasn't just a matter of like, well, there is this political party that is not handling this well and it's ugly, but it actually led to a real sense of alienation among British Jews themselves, who felt, I am now homeless, I have no ideological home anymore. So that's been a really tough one, and the net result is that the Labour Party actually lost the election a little while back, quite dramatically. But what was the anti-Semitism stuff? So the anti-Semitism stuff that was pertinent to that centered on what constitutes legitimate criticism of Israel, right? So that is the tricky part. Like, Israel is a state like any other state. It gets things wrong, it gets things right. How do you speak truth to power in a way that is fair and appropriate, and that, you know, leverages evidence-based criticism of what Israel may do wrong as a country? And that is not anti-Semitic. Saying, you know, policy X, Y, or Z towards the Palestinians or towards any other group in Israel perpetrated by the Israeli government is wrong, is not an anti-Semitic statement. But it can shift into anti-Semitism when these tropes of like Jews in power and everything that Israel does is wrong, and Israel does not have a right to exist, and Jews do not have a right to self-determination, and Israel is the source of all evil, that is when it starts veering into anti-Semitic territory. Right? And this centers around what I've got on my screen here, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism, which is a working definition, it's not a set definition. It's an informal prompt to help people think through what anti-Semitism is, and that is exactly what's being debated in this bill very recently here in Iowa. And the 11 clauses center around criticism of Israel. So it's a very hard discussion. It's even a very hard discussion within the Jewish community because, surprise, surprise, we are internally very diverse and we don't necessarily see eye to eye on what Israel does or how to have that conversation or how vigorous you can have that conversation, and people have a deeply emotional attachment to Israel. Their family lived there. They've been there for their bar or bat mitzvah, or they feel it was such a redemptive response after the trauma of the Holocaust. There are all kinds of reasons why Jews feel deeply connected to the land of Israel, the people of Israel, and the state of Israel. But there are also very real reasons why a sound discussion of Israeli policy is legitimate. But these important discussions can be hijacked by bad actors of any political persuasion, of any political stripe. This working definition was kind of at the source of that controversy around those 11 clauses. Labor accepted this definition without any protest at all. This seems very reasonable, but when it came to identifying sources of anti-Semitism triggered by criticism of Israel, and that kind of having a slippery slope effect, then that is where it got really, really messy and complicated, and that is where these old tropes came back into play. The Netherlands and France, I've kind of lumped them together real quick, have faced a different kind of anti-Semitism, not in this kind of political sense in terms of party representation, but they have seen vandalism and hate crimes. And France has seen particularly virulent physical iterations of anti-Semitism, including murder, right? So there is a question in Europe, like how safe is it to be Jewish and to be visibly and publicly Jewish? Now, I don't want to paint a picture that Europe is an awful place to live. It is a wonderful place to live. I am very proud of my, of my EU membership until I become an American, speedily and in our days, amen and amen. But I'm very proud of the European project and the open borders and the consolidation of everything that Europe stands for in terms of civil liberties and providing a good life for its citizens. So there's a lot to love about Europe. Universal healthcare. There you go. I said it. But it can't be denied that there is a strain of anti-Semitism in European culture that we need to talk about. And you can do both. You can say, I love this place, and there's also some darkness here that we need to talk about. And I think that when we confront any kind of bigotry or bias in ourselves or in other people, it's really okay. You're something does not need to be condemned wholesale or devalued wholesale just because you want to call out the bias or the bigotry, right? Because your best chance of rectifying or resolving that bias or bigotry is not by dehumanizing the other, but seeing them in the fullness of their humanity and then pushing them to do better, right? So I want this to be nuanced. I'm not going to throw the entire continent of Europe under the bus, but there's also no denying that there is a problem and that I could not wear this walking down the streets of England or Holland or France, and I can in Iowa City. I think people at Costco think I'm a weird Mennonite. But, you know, no one has ever said anything or commented anything. I've only been welcomed, and it's been really wonderful. And it's been so life-giving to be able to come into the fullness of my Jewishness and my Jewish expression, especially at the time of anti-Semitism, and to feel safe in my community to do so. Why is there an increase in anti-Semitism? So in Europe, it's slightly different than America. In Europe, there's like a parallel strain, which is just as ugly, of Islamophobia. And actually, I would say that both of them are almost as old. I mean, classical anti-Semitism in European culture goes back 1,500 years, and classical, Islamophobia goes back 700 years because Islam is a newer faith. But these tropes of the Muslims at the gate and the Jews poisoning the wells are basically reinvented time after time into new tropes that are just as relevant, right? And that is the real tragedy, that this is something that has a very long history, and it mutates under the circumstances of modernity. But there's also no denying that apart from like far right, ultranationalist anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, in Europe there's also Muslim-inspired, or let me say Islamist-inspired anti-Semitism, which is where the virus of anti-Semitism has been taken into the Arab world and has mutated. Right? It's the classical European tropes of anti-Semitism that have been taken into the Arab world and started having a life on their own. You know, the protocols of the Elders of Zion mixed in with empathy for the cause of the Palestinians, which really doesn't help the Palestinians, mind you. You know, if we want to support Palestinian self-determination, that is not the way to do it. And, you know, of course, Palestinian self-determination should not be dependent on whether any of the anti-Semitism exists or not, right? That people have a right to self-determination just as the Jewish people have a right to self-determination. And it's very sad that an important conversation around self-determination gets corrupted by anti-Semitism and virulent anti-Zionism in that sense, right? Not all forms of anti-Zionism are anti-Semitic, but you need a very fine comb to make those distinctions, and it requires a very critical gaze and clear mind. But yes, there is an element of anti-Semitism in European Islamism. That is not to say that ordinary Muslims, God forbid, are all anti-Semitic. You know, Muslims and Jews in Europe really do and should stand together. I've done a lot of interfaith work in Europe with my Muslim brothers and sisters, and they were real allies in fighting anti-Semitism too. And the way they get treated in Europe is dismal, and they have my utmost respect. But you also need to be able to honestly assess the sources of anti-Semitism wherever they may come from. Now, anti-Semitism in the United States is slightly different. There's actually been a really interesting study where the populations least likely to hate each other in America are Muslims and Jews. So Jews were the population that are least Islamophobic, and American Muslims are the population that are least anti-Semitic. So that's good news. That's wonderful, right? Like that is an alliance that is so life-giving. Yes, that's a wonderful thing, right? So that's really good. The bad news is that the large majority of anti-Semitism in America comes from the white supremacist far right. Right? Those are our enemies. Those are the people we are locking the doors of the synagogue for, right? Those are the people who shut up the synagogue in Pittsburgh and Poway, and those that, you know, when our safety committee is looking at threats together with the FBI and other organizations that track these kind of hate crimes, 9 out of 10 cases is white supremacy that is the threat to our community. That's really bad news. The good news is that, well, white supremacists are equal opportunity haters, right? And they hate black people, they hate gay people, they hate Muslim people, right? And so when we stand together with those other vulnerable populations, we can strike back, right? And like the beauty of building these really strong relationships with other minority communities is such holy work, right? We are definitely not going to let the haters define any of us, and we all have to stand together, right? So, apart from obviously Pittsburgh, which was the biggest anti-Semitic hate crime and most lethal anti-Semitic hate crime ever on American soil, you had, you know, other incidents in 2019. You know, Poway I mentioned, but also Jersey City. I mentioned, and of course the stabbings in New York, which were perpetrated not by white supremacists, but that was more of an exception to the rule. Again, that doesn't mean you can't address it. The people who perpetrated those crimes also had hateful ideologies, but in general our threat comes mostly from the far right. So here's a map with like anti-Semitic incidents in the USA. You can see that it kind of clusters around areas where there are larger numbers of Jewish communities, right? So on the East Coast, by New York, and that area on the West Coast in California. But there is a sprinkling all over the country, you know, because anti-Semitism is pretty universal, as is any form of bigotry. A history of anti-Semitic incidents. As you can see, so like the very pale blue bar is assault, the medium sky blue is vandalism, and the dark blue is harassment. And you can see, like, as we are stretching into our current time, which is on the far end of the chart, you can see that the bar of assault, which is like the most serious of the three categories, is growing. So like we've always had, you know, incidents, and you can see that they peaked in the mid-90s too. But the worrisome aspect of this trend is that assault, grievous bodily harm, including murder, is becoming more common. Anti-Semitic incidents follow a pattern when viewed by month. My husband and I have been having conversations. Why is that? The ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, doesn't know either. We have some theories. November, election time. Elections bring out anxiety in people. I mean, I can't even vote, and it's bringing out anxiety in me. Also, you know, when power is under scrutiny, it feeds into anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of Jewish power, right? Another peak is around fall is the Jewish high holidays. Obviously, because Judaism is more visible in the public mind, we have Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Jewish New Year and Day of Atonement, right? So those are other reasons why there is a peak. And apparently, you know, in July and June, there's a bit of a dip. Maybe like bigots and haters go on vacation too. I don't know. You know? So anti-Semitic data is really comprehensive, and they are not isolated little nodes. They are hubs that connect other forms of hate crimes. So, like, in a way, it really is about the canary in the coal mine, right, where anti-Jewish violence is often has, you know, as you would say in the medical world, a comorbidity with other forms of hateful violence, right? And again, that like should really inform our response of solidarity with other minority communities. That anti-Semitism is the conspiracy theory of everything that animates other forms of hatred. And you saw this in the Charlottesville march, when they said, Jews will not replace us, they weren't actually afraid that 2% of the population of the United States would like convert the rest of you know, and make America entirely Jewish. I mean, it would solve a number of problems, finding board succession for my synagogue. But no, that's not what they were referring to. Although I wouldn't mind some more Jews if you're so inclined. What they were referring to is that they believe that Jewish power, this cabal of Jews, are facilitating the demise of the white race. Right? So we are the spearhead of a corrupting multicultural influence that is leading to the hybridization of the American people and the browning of America. You know, I almost consider it a compliment because I love multiculturalism. So to be charged with like the crime of being a multiculturalist, I say, heck yeah, I'm guilty as charged. I love, you know, cultural diversity. I'm an immigrant myself. I've lived in 5 or 6 different countries. So unfortunately, when they say it, it's not meant as a compliment, and there are deadly consequences. Right, so that is the charge. The charge is that Jews are pulling the levers of power behind the scenes and manipulating, quote unquote, these inferior races that they consider intellectually inferior to do our heinous bidding in corrupting pure white America. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. You don't have to make it up because it's real, unfortunately. It's very twisted and it's very real. Right? So that is what is meant by that ideology, and that is why these anti-Semitic hate crimes are being perpetrated, because they want to kind of target us who they see as the source. Right? Most forms of bigotry are about kicking downwards. They are about saying, I am superior, you are inferior, I am better than you, I am genetically superior, intellectually superior, economically superior, and I have a right to be superior, because that's the natural order of things. That is like very typical race theory and eugenic theory in, you know, white supremacist circles, or any kind of form of bigotry. I mean, you have bigotry across the world, but in our context, it tends to be white supremacy, right? What is different about anti-Semitism is that it's both kicking down and kicking up. So an anti-Semite might say Jews are these corrupted, depraved individuals, and you do get that in anti-Semitic propaganda, that Jews are seen as genetically corrupted in some way, which is hilarious because we're genetically very diverse, but that we are actually intellectually superior. So we're nasty, but we're smart, right? And that is how they kick up. We have all the wealth, we have all the power, we control the banks, we control the media. If I control the banks, I could get rid of my student loans. That'd be great, right? So that is an interesting thing to understand about anti-Semitism, that in that sense it is a theory of everything, because it tries to be the unifying explanation of how they see the world, rather than those people are just bad people. It actually becomes an animating philosophy for how the world works and how much they hate it. And that's really important to understand, because when Jews feel vulnerable, and you know, many Jews are middle class and we have skin privilege, we're white. Not all Jews are white, but many Jews are white, and there is a big discussion in our community ourselves acknowledging that not all Jews are white, but Jews are generally perceived as white. So let me put it that way, Jews are perceived as white, so we have skin privilege where we don't deal with the issues that African Americans deal with, for instance, thank God, but we're still vulnerable, right? And you have to hold those two things in your heart, that I have a lot of privilege, as you know, being an overeducated white woman, but you know, when I'm on my pulpit in the synagogue and the shooter comes in who wants to kill my congregation and me, that is going to do me no good, that privilege, right? And it is complicated, and like, it requires nuance and an examination of our own power as individuals to be able to confront that. And that is a task, it's a holy task that all of us have to do, right? But that is the reality that, yes, if I take this off, I can pass as any other random white person, right? If I put this on, the dynamic could be shifted. And of course, I don't want my safety to be contingent about the choices I make, about how I perform my Jewishness or wear my Jewishness out into the world. I should be able to do that without any fear. So as you can see, this is some statistics. You can actually see that Islamist and left-wing anti-Semitism, as heinous and odious as it is actually pretty minor. And then there's this other, I guess there was this one person who just hated Jews just because, I don't know. But bigotry and right-wing are far outstrip any of the other data on this chart, right? So almost 7,000 incidents of bigotry and over 5,000 incidents of right-wing motivations, right? And I think that's really important to understand, and it's also more lethal, right? When you look at bigotry and right-wing white supremacists violence, the assault is pretty deadly, right? So that is a reality. In case you want to, know what you're up against, these are the organizations that perpetrate most anti-Semitic hate crimes. I mean, the Daily Stormer Good Book Club sounds as awful as it possibly could. They all sound really awful. I mean, I think their language is overt and only very slightly covert in terms of iterating their white supremacist aims.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Some of us here can't read what's up there.
Okay.
So don't assume that we all can read that.
Okay. So I will thank you for that. I
read
appreciate.
everything, but I just
Okay, so Daily Stormer Book Club, New Jersey European Heritage Association, Loyal White Knights, Patriot Front, and Vanguard America are the ordinary 5 white supremacist far-right hate groups most responsible for anti-Semitic hate crimes. And you can bet your dollar that they are responsible for any other kind of hate crime targeting other minority populations too. So, moving into the next part of our talk, I just want to kind of confront us with some of the sources of anti-Semitism and how anti-Semitism impacts our lives as Jews because it's such an ancient form of hatred. Some say it's the world's oldest hatred, right? So I already talked about, some of the political theories, sociological theories of anti-Semitism, but there are also spiritual components to this, right? And Purim is just around the corner, the biblical feast in which we read the book of Esther, and of course Pesach is a month out after that, and these archetypes of Pharaoh and Amalek and Haman, and in a sense also, Antiochus of the Hanukkah story could be added to that, are very much part of our religious consciousness because we have been living with these texts and these realities for so long. So when you encounter these texts, try and identify what the false charge is against Jews and how these ancient prejudices impact anti-Semitism today. So Pharaoh, right? Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who knew not Joseph, and he said unto his people, Behold, the people of the children of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when there befalls us any war, they also join themselves unto our enemies and fight against us and get them up out of the land. So what are some of the things that you can identify in that text? What is the charge? Why does Pharaoh hate the children of Israel? Too many. Too many, too strong, too mighty. Fear. They're not like us. Fifth column mentality, right? These immigrants, you know, it's that trope. The book of Exodus, unfortunately, is still very relevant today. I always make this statement with my congregants, although, you know, as a private person, I have political views, I'm a human being. I never talk partisan politics from the pulpit. Obviously, that is highly inappropriate. But I do say to my congregants, it's very hard to do that when you open the book of Exodus and you see so many parallels with today's world, right? Yeah, this is the oldest trick in the book, right? Scapegoating immigrants. I take a lot of umbrage with that. First of all, because the Torah tells us to love the immigrant 36 times over, and I am an immigrant myself, so I guess a little bit slow. Amalek and Haman are kind of related issues in a weird way. So Amalek was a strange story. When the children of Israel were sojourning through the desert, Amalek attacked them. And it's kind of like, well, you know, why? And he attacked the stragglers, the people who were most vulnerable, the people who couldn't quite make it, the people who needed help. And the Jewish tradition has always taken this as this archetype of anti-Semitism. Pharaoh, he was kind of rational about it. You know, as awful as he was, you know, there was some kind of ideology behind it or social analysis behind it. But Amalek, it was just clear hatred out of spite. Right? Like, why did he have to do that? Remember what Amalek did to you on the way as you were coming out of Egypt, how he met you on the way and attacked your rear ranks, all the stragglers at your rear, when you were tired and weary, and he did not fear God, which is code for he did not have universal ethics. Therefore it shall be when the Lord your God has given you rest from your enemies all around, in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess as an inheritance, that you will blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, you shall not forget. And blotting out Amalek and not forgetting is this beautiful paradox that many a rabbi has given many a sermon on. That we should always remember the trauma, but we should not dignify the perpetrators of hatred by naming them and giving them an identity beyond their crime, right? It's the same with, for instance, the Pittsburgh shooter. There was a lot of discussion in the media, should this person be named? Should this person, you know, be identified as such? And Haman was seen as a descendant of Amalek, right? Haman the Agagite was seen as a descendant, and also just hated Jews out of spite. And when Haman saw that Mordecai did not bow or do him obedience, then Haman was full of wrath. And every time I say Haman, you guys are supposed to say boo. That's what we do at Purim. But he disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had told him of the people of Mordecai, so that Haman sought to destroy all the Jews who were throughout the whole kingdom of, I can never say this man's name in English, Achashverosh in Hebrew, but Ahasuerus, I don't know, the people of Mordecai, right? So, again, we have these three archetypes of anti-Semitism in our tradition, right? So, just some like closing thoughts before I get to just some very brief stuff on why Judaism is awesome. I already talked about how the hatred of Jews and Judaism are overlapping concepts and bound up with each other, and Jews are the canaries in the coal mine, and how anti-Semitism is a theory of everything. And I would add to that hating Jews or Jewishness or Judaism is actually a moral and spiritual inversion of our Jewish values, right? It's not just that there are people who hate us and that's really awful, but they actually completely subvert what Judaism stands for. And in that sense, it almost feels metaphysical to us, right? That there's this spiritual dimension to this kind of hatred. the importance of understanding Jewish identity, because what bigots do with the object of their bigotry is that they reduce us to a set of stereotypes. And we are not a set of stereotypes. We are a living, breathing, diverse, internally contradictory, rich, culturally rich, historically rich group of people. We are a global people. We are a religious civilization, tribe, and culture and covenant community. And we have to de-racialize Judaism, but also recognize its peoplehood aspects as a valid expression of Jewish identity. I acknowledge that Jewish identity is hard to understand for non-Jews, but we really are open and welcoming. And of course I mentioned Jewish values about loving the stranger already, for we know the heart of the stranger, for we were strangers in Egypt. What should be our response to anti-Semitism? Not closing up shop. We have to lean into our Jewishness. This is not the time for us to back down. And whenever people are confronted with crisis, there's this gut impulse to kind of pull away and to bunker down and to pull away from the danger. But we actually have to kind of reevaluate that tendency in ourselves and say, can I be strong enough? And maybe for some people the answer is no, I cannot be strong enough, and we should see that with grace. But for those of us who do feel strong enough to proclaim our Jewishness, or to proclaim our friendship and allyship with the Jewish people as non-Jews who want to stand side by side fighting anti-Semitism, this is the time to do that. Right? This is the time to be vocal about that. And being, encouraging curiosity. Come to the synagogue. Read some stuff about Judaism online. It's okay, come check us out. We're not scary. We have nice food after prayers, it's true. A lot of food. We'll feed you, we'll love you. And just like having the mindset of curiosity as you move through life towards any group of people and any minority. And of course, carrying out our values and being a light unto the nations and doubling down on our values. Right? Balancing particularism, our right and everyone else's right to their uniqueness, and universalism, sharing our values with and concern for the world, Abrahamic hospitality and the pursuit of justice and the repair of our world, Letaken Olam B'Malchut Shaddai, repairing the world under the sovereignty of God. Right? Now, very quickly, because I'm really overshooting. That's what you get for trying to condense 3,000 years of history. The gifts of Judaism. 3 takeaways for non-Jews, right? I think there are like misconceptions about Judaism among non-Jews, especially people from a Christian background. And we live in a predominantly Christian culture, so I'm speaking to that context. We too believe that God is love. There is a particular strain of anti-Semitism that says the Old Testament, which we call the Hebrew Bible, is a book of law, and the New Testament is a book of love. But for us, they are not diametrically opposed entities. In fact, they're completely intertwined. We see the law as love. We see our spiritual legal tradition as legislating justice and legislating kindness, and that legislation is how we express our love, how God expresses God's love for us, and how we express our love for God and for each other and for humanity. So God is love. Jews absolutely believe in a loving God. And law is grace. We don't see it as punitive. We don't see it as like raising an impossibly high bar of perfection that's unattainable. We don't see it as something that if you mess up there is no redemption. We have Yom Kippur for that. That is our mechanism for forgiveness and redemption. Like that one time when I was at Trader Joe's and I sampled the free samples and I thought they were vegetarian. I'm like, this tastes like pork. Oops. And we are not a museum, by which I mean we are a living, breathing tradition that has its own integrity, independent of any other faith tradition, including Christianity. We are not an extension of Christianity. We share common ancestry, but we really are our own community. And I know that sounds a little weird to make that explicit, but sometimes Christians can say, oh, I love Judaism because Jesus was a Jew. It's true. He was a Jew. He was a pretty okay Jew. I'm more than okay. He was a good Jew. Good Jewish boy. But like, while Jesus is inspiring to me in the sense that he was a teacher of human wisdom, just like Muhammad was and the Buddha was, you know, and other great faith leaders and prophets were, like on a universalist human level, he's inspiring to me. He has no place in my faith tradition. And that's really okay. But it's really okay for Jews to say, that's nice that Jesus is your rabbi, but he's not my rabbi. That doesn't mean there aren't universal principles to be learned from his teachings, but I can derive those also from Muhammad or Buddha or any Baha'u'llah or any other great teacher of spirituality. And I think that's a very subtle distinction that can be a little hard for Christians to accept, because rightly so, Christians are on fire for Christ. That's your job. That's the Great Commission. You do you, right? But we do us, right? And it can be a little awkward to make that explicit, because it can feel as a wholesale rejection. We're not rejecting, we're just saying, you know, we have our own way of being in the world that is not dependent on the validation of any other faith group. And that applies to every minority. And we are very much alive. So, just some brief reasons why Judaism is awesome. We gave you the weekends! I mean, honestly, it's a good one, it's a keeper. And we have a balance between devotion, questioning, and practical spirituality. We are life-affirming, we're intellectually curious. We have a non-coercive theology. You know, I hope that as I've taught you, that you have kind of been able to surmise glimpses of Jewish ethics and humor as I spoke, right? That by talking about these things, I hope that I'm able to bring you some of the thought processes that I've made our community and that make our community really beautiful and unique. We preach universal salvation, meaning you don't have to be Jewish to be, quote-unquote, saved. Any human being can have a relationship with God and can walk in God's ways and be righteous, irrespective of your religion. And even if you don't have a religion, Jews believe in salvation through works. I know, salvation through works. But we do believe that, right? And that's a good thing, because we judge people on their good works, irrespective of what their faith is. And I think that is such a powerful message, right? That if you're a good human being, then we love you for that. And we don't require you to become like us. You can convert to Judaism. It's possible. And it's fun. But you don't have to. Which also doesn't mean we don't want you. It just means that we respect where other faiths are at. And if your soul aligns with the Jewish people, welcome. And if your soul aligns with another tradition, God bless you. We have a rich culture, tradition, history, and theology, and ancient wisdom for many modern challenges. And try and, you know, when you're delving into your Old Testament, Hebrew Bible next time, and you read like these ancient texts, think about how they might be applicable to the ecological crisis of our time or the moral crisis of our time, and it will really speak to you in a new way. We are a multi-ethnic global religious civilization with porous boundaries of belonging and a shared destiny, and we are complicated, and I wouldn't want it any other way, and it's been a real privilege to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I think we have time for about one question, so because Esther covered a great deal of wonderful material. So if anybody has a burning question, we will put it out there. Okay, I'm going to go clear in the back.
Yes, Rabbi, I was a little amazed that you did not mention a major source of anti-Semitism, and that is among the Christian Zionists, whose goal in supporting Israel is the eventual conversion of Jews. And you know, that the ambiguities of that relationship are myriad, but I wonder if there is an overlap among evangelical Christians and the white supremacists that you mentioned.
Whoa, that is another hour.
So if you could do that in about 1 minute.
Okay, so obviously, you know, this is not a complete survey of every source of anti-Semitism. Yes, there is a strain of spiritual anti-Semitism in certain sectors of the evangelical world, which wants to see all Jews bend their knee to Jesus Christ, and that uses Israel as a landing pad for Jesus, essentially. Right? It's very toxic, and I also really think it's not my place to say, because I'm not a Christian, and I'm certainly not a Christian theologian, but in my view, it would seem like that's a perversion of core Christian teachings, and I think much better of Christians than those evangelicals who think of that way of themselves, right? So, yeah, it is very complicated, and it eludes me too sometimes, that relationship. I don't particularly, you know, favor that relationship, and I often question the wisdom of pursuing that relationship. Having said that, I also understand there are pragmatic reasons for that relationship, but I am not a pragmatist, I'm a moralist. I get paid to be a schmoozer and a moralist, right? If I started doing pragmatics, I would miss the prophetic message of my rabbinate, and that would be awful, right? So, but I'm also not the one sitting down negotiating Israeli politics or the American-Israeli relationship. Thank God. Way over my pay grade. But yes, there's absolutely this very bizarre paradox between these people who are supporting Israel, but who hate the spiritual gifts of Judaism. Right? And there's like this weird thing where some people on the far left love Jews and would fight for Jews in terms of the diaspora and fight for my rights to practice my relationship to my faith freely, right? But might delegitimize Israel's existence, right? In other ways. But then on the religious right, you get the inverse pattern. They want to allocate all this funding and support to Israel, but they invalidate my right to exist as a spiritual being who is part of the covenant of Abraham and Sarah. Right? So you're absolutely right for pointing that out. It is very complicated, and I think it just goes to show how defensive certain sectors of the Jewish community feels sometimes. And the more anti-Semitism there is, the more defensive we become, and then it just becomes a question of circling the wagons, which is such a tragic outcome of what should be such an open-hearted conversation. Any other comments? I'm also available if you want to come up after we close this out and ask me some questions privately. I would be more than happy to do that.
Help me to thank Rabbi Hugenholtz. As you see, her contact information is up here, or we can get that to you. Thank you so much for being here. We do reuse, if I can have your attention for a moment, we do